tonight, Own Engineering, so formerly Anderson. So let's all give them a hand for putting this together. And second, our event partner for the evening is Better Block SGF. If you don't know who Better Block is, they do a lot of awesome work on public engagement for looking at public placemaking and urban spaces and bettering our community. So let's give them a hand for supporting ULI and being engaged. All right, so if you aren't familiar with, I know we've got quite a few new faces. So the Urban Land Institute of Southwest Missouri, we're a newer group to the region where we've been growing over the last 6 months or so to establish a presence here. The Urban Land Institute is really an interdisciplinary group that brings together everybody in the real estate development, land use, and planning world to come together and advocate for best practices, learn how to move their communities forward through a region and as a third party to the city and development world. So the mission of the Urban Land Institute is to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact in communities worldwide. So we work towards that really by working to connect, like I said, the diverse amount of stakeholders, whether that's the developers, the finance side, the banking, the architects, the engineers, the neighborhoods, the nonprofits, and all the regulatory agencies. It's really a way to bring everybody together to create dialogue and learn about best practices and build these connections that can really help move our community forward. We work to inspire through those educational resources, events like this, bringing in great innovative topics to really learn about what other communities are doing and to really advance what we're doing in our community. And then leading and advocating for best practices, sustainable development in our communities. So with that, Matthew Petty with Pattern Zones Inc. So this is an incredible opportunity to have him here. We're very thankful he is here. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn him over and let him start the session.
Thanks, Brandon. I was looking at this picture and I just that's the only picture I have, so I guess I need to update that a little bit. I'm Matthew. You can call me Matthew. You can call me Matt. You can call me that guy got way too excited at that ULI event. I am pretty excited. I'm going to talk to you about pre-approved building programs, but I'm also going to talk to you about the benefits of ULI. I'm a founding member of ULI Northwest Arkansas, which has been going on for a couple of years, just attained its official district council status. It's been huge for me. It's been a big part, it made a big difference for my career, but also a big difference for my communities. Maybe before I get started, can we do this? Can I give a show of hands if you are already a ULI member? Okay, everybody else in the room, I'm so glad you're here. Okay, joining ULI, you definitely want to be in this club. If ULI Southwest Missouri is successful, is effective, if it's anything like what has happened in Northwest Arkansas, anybody who is in a related industry, and it's a big tent system, any related industry, who is interested in having a better community, a community that is that has opportunities that are convenient for people to make their own choices about how to be healthy, about how to have fun, about how to raise families, about where to work, about where to live. They're all in the club. So if you want to meet somebody, if you need a resource, if you need a referral, you don't have to look very far. That's the biggest benefit of ULI. And of course ULI does more than that. It's more than a club, but it is what you make out of it. So the more people that join, the more people that come to these events, the better it gets. It's exponential. It can be so amazing what happens. And I think I did a rough count, like 5 by 5 by 5. I think there's more than 50 people in the room now. That's more people than we had at our first meetings in Northwest Arkansas. So you're already on the right track. Really encourage you to think hard about this decision and make the right one and join. Okay, so I run a company called Pattern Zones Company. We're a new company. We're a startup, but we started years ago with this concept in our urban planning and our architecture businesses with my partners. And what we do is we help cities address housing issues on the permitting side. We can't solve all the housing issues for permitting. We know, for example, that there aren't enough plumbers to build all the houses we need. There are lots of other challenges, but permitting is one of those big challenges. And we think we can solve it with something that we call pattern zones, which uses pre-approved building permits to do it. I'm going to talk to you about some nuts and bolts about that, about how that can work, about how it can work for Springfield. I got to do a great lunch today with some Restore SGF and some ULI leadership members. And then I got to take a neighborhood tour where we saw about a half dozen neighborhoods and centers of those neighborhoods, the little commercial nodes, as well as the state of housing in your best neighborhoods and in your neighborhoods that need a little bit more help. But that doesn't make me an expert on Springfield. Okay, I grew up about 2 hours south of here. Other than being here today and stopping into the Science Museum with my kids a couple of times, my only experience is coming here as a kid and spending the day at Bass Pro. So I'm not an expert on Springfield. But I will tell you that as I watched you come into the room, there were so many people I thought, I think I know that person. They look so, and you know, it turns out you're not the person that I thought you were. You just really look like them, and this happened 5 or 6 times, but I take this as a sign. We like to think our communities are totally unique and totally different, but there is so much about us, about how we live, how we work, what laws we have to live and work under, the kinds of groups that we have, and what we can do with groups like ULI that is similar between us. And so I at least, even though I'm an outsider, want to share with you what I've learned and what my perspectives are along the way, and maybe we can learn something together about one another and about how to do this kind of work together effectively. So here's my goal. My goal is to make good housing absolutely easy. Dead easy. Right now it is so easy, relatively speaking, to pull a permit to build one house. And it's pretty darn easy, relatively speaking, to pull a permit to do a suburban development. Now, I don't mean that it's actually easy, like you can walk in the door and you can just get it, but I mean compared to doing a corner store, compared to doing a duplex, or heaven forbid, a fourplex, right? Or heaven forbid, a Main Street building, getting a permit for a strip mall, or a storage unit, or an apartment complex is easy compared to those things. But that's not what we say we want in our plans. That's not what we say we want in our community meetings. What we say we want is we want better neighborhoods. We say we want neighborhoods that look and feel like the most historic, most cherished neighborhoods that we already have. That we want more of those things. And doing those things is not easy. That's good housing. It should be easy. So that's what I want to talk about. I'm obsessed with this problem. In Fayetteville and the broader region, Northwest Arkansas, 40 people move to Northwest Arkansas every day. We're booming. By any measure, by most conventional measures, people would call that extreme success. But it comes at a price. It comes at a price of people losing their houses when they get priced out. It comes at a price of not being able to keep up with infrastructure as we have more and more capacity needs for people that move there. To put this in perspective, we have to open in Northwest Arkansas almost 18 houses every day to make room for 40 new people every day if we want to keep housing prices level. And we're already in a crisis. We're already in a crisis. So Northwest Arkansas is booming, it's fast growing. You may think that's not relatable to Springfield, but Springfield has very similar challenges. You have a neglected neighborhood where it's hard to pull a permit, where it's hard to get financing, same challenge. If you have popular neighborhoods where pricing is going up and up and up, that's because you don't have enough of those places. Those places are in such high demand, you need more of them to hold pricing level. So we should make that kind of good housing easy. I want to illustrate this with this diagram. I'm going to talk about something called incremental development, and I want to contrast this with large-scale development. And I'm not here to pick on large-scale developments. I'm not here to pick on towers or mid-rises. I'm not here to pick on great downtown developments that do mixed use really well. Cities need those. They need those to punctuate the broader fabric of the community, but they don't make up the majority, and they never will. Look across the community today. You may be hyped to see the next commercial development, and that's important too, but recognize 9 out of 10 or 95 out of 100 buildings in Springfield are regular residential buildings. That's the backbone of the community. It's the backbone of the economy. And neighborhoods are the backbone of the entire city. It's what drives and enables all the rest to happen. This is a typical set of blocks in a typical neighborhood in so many communities in America, very similar to what I saw today in almost every neighborhood that we looked at. This is a series of large lots with modest homes. You might think of these as ranch houses or modest bungalows or something like that. And there's a corridor which has what we've come to think of as typical or conventional development on the corridor. We think that when we're going to solve housing, that we have to replace the neighborhoods that we already have. That's the fear that people express, right? When there's a new proposal from City Hall or a new developer comes forward and says, I want to talk to the neighborhoods and convince you that what I'm doing is a good thing. It's a natural fear. It's a rational fear. You can expect to see that everywhere you go. It's a conversation that we need to have. But I'm telling you, that's not how it has to be. And you don't have to replace neighborhoods to add housing into Springfield or to any of these neighborhoods, whether they're already successful or they've been neglected and they're struggling today. Neighborhoods typically grow over a series of improvements that take place on a schedule of 15 to 20 years. Every 5, 6, 7, or 8 years, you see new things happen that are usually inspired by what's already there. It's familiar according to what's already there, right? It's almost like against like. You'll hear that sometime. It means housing that is more or less like what already exists, with some personal touches or some personal flares or maybe one notch of the dial turned up. And every 5 to 8 years, you can see this kind of thing start to happen again, where we start to add more. And this is how neighborhoods should grow. This is way different than replacing neighborhoods. After 15 to 20 years, you can imagine that you can see some larger corridor developments that are more intense. Now you can justify public improvements, and the reason you can justify public improvements is because every single one of those new structures is new tax revenue. You wonder how your city pays for potholes. You wonder how it pays for park upkeep or how it doesn't pay for park upkeep. You wonder how it can afford to staff one department or not afford to staff another. It comes down to revenue, and revenue is taxes, and buildings can be one of the major sources of taxes. And you might say, well, what about sales tax? Well, I mean, the fact is, people buy the same amount of toilet paper or the same amount of food to get the same amount of calories, no matter where it comes from, no matter what format it takes. But this is 7 times the property tax revenue versus the first image. It's a huge factor. If you don't address this in your city and you don't have a big tent approach like ULI can have to help address and advocate for this issue, you're leaving so much revenue on the table. You're leaving so much community development on the table, and that's community development that helps everybody. And more than that, there's a moral argument here. The price of not doing this is what you have. It's having neighborhoods that are neglected. That is what you're paying to get when you make a decision not to do anything. So we think neighborhoods can grow like this. They can grow incrementally. That's the natural order neighborhoods grow. And in fact, whenever neighborhoods do grow like this, they remain familiar to the existing residents. This is an illustrative diagram. This is just a concept. This isn't based on any particular place. But in this example, there's 6 times as many places for people to live, 6 times as many households in this neighborhood on these 4 blocks, and not a single house had to be torn down to do it. This neighborhood may be different, but it looks like a version of the same neighborhood that it started with. It was not replaced. It grew up. Totally different way of approaching things. When I was on the city council, I was a city council member for 13 years in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I was first elected when I was 24, and along the way I learned that what I cared about, which was sustainability and green space and environmentalism and so on and so forth, was intimately connected with transportation decisions, budget decisions, land use decisions, zoning codes, and so on and so forth. I had no idea when I ran for office the first time. But I came to understand that it was important to everything. And whether you identify with having those same concerns as I do, or you care about more bottom line, have a more bottom line approach, we need to have the same recognition, which is that changing the laws simply is not enough. And this was my theory. I thought when I'm a council member, that's my job. I have authority over what legislation gets introduced. As a planner, when I became a private sector planner, which I've done for about the past 7 or 8 years, I thought this was my job again. I was supposed to help communities, just like I helped Fayetteville, change the laws to make new things allowed. I thought developers want to make money. If you can do more of these things, they can make more money, and so they'll just do it if we can change what's allowed. If we can just allow a corner store in these neighborhoods, it'll definitely happen, was my theory. If we would just allow cottages to be built in a backyard, they would definitely do it as long as we allowed it. I thought we had bad laws. I knew we had bad laws, and that was all that needed to change, and I did a lot of that. But you know what? It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. I have to say, I'm proud of that work, but every single one of those efforts ultimately should be judged as a failure. A failure we can learn from. Stuff that has to happen, you have to change the laws, but not enough. Necessary, but totally insufficient. And the reason is that when you're a builder, when you're a developer, when you're anybody making any decision and you have a choice to make, you will do the version that does enough for you that is also the easiest for you. You will do what is the most convenient thing that still does enough. So in Fayetteville, we changed all those laws. We have one of the first sets of form-based codes in the country. We've got one of the best ADU ordinances in the country. A whole bunch of stuff. I've done things that are as small as 3-word amendments and as big as like 5-page brand new laws. None of it's been enough. And we still have something called the lot split loophole. Because if you're going to pull a single-family permit and you're not going to ask to replat the property, then you don't have to do stormwater regulations, you don't have to do tree preservation regulations, you don't have to have a public hearing with the planning commission or the city council. It's so convenient in comparison. We made duplexes legal, we made all these other things legal, and the lot split loophole dominates permitting, right? And so I learned this lesson. I learned that you have to make things convenient. You have to make what you want convenient. So if you love what Roundtree is, or you love what these other neighborhoods could become, and you have visions for those, small-scale development works completely differently than the industry of capital D development works. Okay, first off, you can't solve a problem by making it bigger. Okay, you have one lot, you have 1 square of land, you can't just buy more land. You can't just add more units to solve problems. You have a certain amount of money for a down payment, you can get a certain loan. If you can't get the loan to do a cottage court with 4 units, you back off. That's how you solve that problem in small-scale development. Okay, you have to keep these problems small to keep them possible. Similarly, small-scale developers don't get the luxury of hiring out for everything, right? The project can't afford it. I did one project in Fayetteville. I did it to prove that small-scale mixed-use development was possible. It's kind of a project that I did out of spite. It has 9 units. It's under 10,000 square feet. In addition to the units, it's got a tap room. It's got a smoothie bar. We had the late-night rowdy crowd. We had the sorority crowd. Had a food truck. It was meant to tick all the boxes of people that people said were too much, too complicated, you couldn't work, it wouldn't do it. And it's successful. I walked 3 inches taller for 2 years after that project came out of the ground. But I couldn't afford to hire everything out. And the things that I did have to hire out, I had to learn the lesson the hard way, that I should have kept the project smaller. I paid $16,000 in legal fees to develop documentation along the way. If I had done 200 units, I would have spent $16,000 in legal fees along the way. That's why these projects are small and they're different. And the total deal breaker on this is if there's a confusing system that's standing in the way. If you want to build a bridge, you look at the economics. You look at the fundamentals, you look at the regional demographics and the comparative economies, and you justify things on that basis. You don't look at the river and count how many people are already swimming across. So when people tell you, if we wanted duplexes, if builders wanted to build accessory units for returning relatives in the backyards, if homeowners actually wanted those things, they'd be building them already. That's not correct. The applications aren't coming in because the system isn't easy to access. But I promise you, if you have real estate demand, if you have demand for more neighborhoods like Roundtree, and it seems like you do, if you have demand for that and you make it easy to build those things, the applications will come forward. So I really want to drive this point home. Every consultant you've ever seen has a 2x2 matrix somewhere in their slideshow. No apologies, this one's the one I put in here. So most projects that we think of, at least the way we think of conventional development, is it's big and planned, every bit of it from the very beginning. Huge planning exercise, pencils down, now we can get to work. And the way you fund those projects is the way we've come to recognize and expect, which is you have to recruit a ton of outside capital, right? You have to stack it up from whatever sources are required, but it's big and it comes all at once. That's the industry focus, okay? And that's the only way those kinds of projects can work and be funded. You do not bootstrap those projects out of the ground. You do not do those giant master plan, 100-acre, 200-acre subdivisions, one unit at a time. The phases have to be bigger to make those work, right? Those are the operating requirements. Small and incremental is different, right? It doesn't need to be master planned. It's done based on what we already know and what the neighborhood can justify and expect, right? It's done one at a time. And it is entrepreneurial and bootstrap. It doesn't come with big capital, right? It comes with friends and family money. It comes with in-house loans from the local bank. Way different way of accessing these things. And if you try to put these things together, it just doesn't work. You either get mismatched objectives because you're trying to do things that are too big, or you're trying to do it in an incremental way, or you get mismatched operating requirements because you're trying to plan it all out and do it one step at a time. So here's the lesson here. Locals can actually do the small-scale work. You don't have to recruit anyone from out of town to do small-scale projects. It can be people like you. If you've ever walked through a neighborhood or driven through a neighborhood here in Springfield and you've looked at a particular site and you say, gosh, this one street, I have a feeling, this one street, that one property, we could do something, somebody could do something there, somebody ought to do something there. That somebody that ought to do something is one of you. It's one of you, right? You can totally take on that kind of work. These are the kinds of projects that can be done on the weekends and in the evenings. You don't have to change careers to do them. These are huge opportunities for wealth building, for locals, and for community building and the opportunities that come when you have new, usable buildings in these places. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what you can do, about ULI, about Restore SGF, about you as individuals, and then we're going to get into nuts and bolts of pre-approved building programs. First, what you're already doing. Number one, you got to convene, but you got to go beyond that, you got to coordinate. This is a great first start. This meeting and the meetings you've had in the prior months, super great. And the fact that this is socially oriented is the right decision. It's the number one thing you got to do because you have to back each other up socially. When you go and you talk and you argue in favor of a particular planning proposal, whether it's at City Hall or it's at a neighborhood meeting or it's at the dinner table, to be able to come back to a group like this and say, that person behind you on camera made such a face when you made your argument, like we need to talk about, to have that commiseration underpins everything. It's what can keep you coming back and know that you're part of something that's larger than you. But more than that, you have to coordinate. You have to be asking one another, what are you going to do over the next 2 weeks? And when you come back together, you say, how did it go? What are we going to do next? And you have to do that for years. For years. Okay? Forever. Some people in this room have been advocates and working on these issues for 20 years, for a whole career. And that's just getting it started. That's just what got us all here today. Right? This work, if you think you've got a runway and then you take off and you're over and you're just flying the plane and it's smooth sailing, you're wrong. This work never, ever, 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 ever ends. Ever. Okay? Okay? If you think it ends, what you're saying is someday, this community, we don't have to care about it anymore. That's how you got here. That's how these neighborhoods ended up in the condition they're in that you're trying to restore. Okay, second, you got to support quick actions. Okay, City Hall has to do some things in big ways. They have to do some pieces of legislation that put a lot of stuff together, but there are also a lot of things that can be done really quickly. And you can ask for that. There are some things that just don't have to go to committee. There are some things that don't have to go to the zoning board. There are some things that the City Council can just take up and just get done, and it can be very small things. One of the things that I did that was super small when I was on council is I just changed the rules about setbacks. I didn't change the setbacks. I just said the eave of a building, the chimney of a building, the pad for an air conditioner is allowed to be inside a setback. And what we care about is the foundation. Before we changed the rule, it all had to be inside the setback. You might think, gosh, what kind of BS is that? Well, I agree. It's total BS. And the inspectors thought it was BS too, because now you have to construction stake. You have to go out and stake and survey every element of the building and not just where the concrete is going to be poured for the foundation. And you're thinking, gosh, this is so in the weeds. This is the guy that got way too excited. But think about that. How many hours did you just save every single builder on every single project? And that is something that can be done in one night at a city council meeting. There is a list, 3 pages long minimum, of stuff like that. And the way you figure out what those things are is you go in your historic neighborhoods that you love and you observe with the critical eye, with the technician's eye, and you say, how do we write the codes that make this legal again? And that's where you get your list. That stuff can be done really fast. It can be done one at a time. Okay, the next thing is you have to be willing to say that some things failed. Okay, this is what I mean about housing. I tried all of the things. All those things are necessary but insufficient. But you have to hold those results accountable. And you have to say, these are old problems. These are old problems. And the solutions we tried haven't worked, which means we need new solutions we haven't tried yet. And until you can take that step, which is a step in your mindset, right, as a community, that you're not going to rely on the next case study to come out, you're not going to wait, you're going to try your own solutions, you're going to demand that your elected leaders, your appointed leaders do the same thing, then you won't be ready to take these steps. So this is an attitude adjustment that has to happen. Okay, last, and then we are going to get into nuts and bolts of pre-approved building programs, is you have to personify these. Okay, this isn't about any one proposal, but for example, if there's a proposal and somebody says, what would happen if we don't go forward with this proposal? Say it's a proposal and it's, take it for granted while I'm saying this, that this is a proposal that is in the right location, with the right amount of new housing, that is coherent with the plans and with the community input and so on and so forth. Take that for granted for a moment. Might need your help, Brandon. Take that for granted for a moment. When somebody asks what would happen if we don't do this, you have to put that in personal terms. You say, well, if we don't make this decision and we don't start making decisions like this, when your kids move away and then come back in 20 years, they won't have a place to come back to. Say, when you want your parents to come back to this community, they're going to have to live with you and your kids because they aren't going to have a place of their own to move into. You say, if you wanted to open a business in your neighborhood, you're going to have to choose a different neighborhood because there's not going to be a place in your neighborhood to open a business in. Right? You have to make these things very personable. And the reason is that that's how we work. Okay? This isn't a technical exercise. This is an exercise in love. Speaking the language of love. Speaking the language of what people care about. Right? What people care about in their hearts, not inside their heads. So you have to put these in realistic terms if you want to make these efforts durable. Right? Otherwise, it's just a bunch of nerds. I'm one of them getting excited. Okay? And I can be really excited. And I can get into all the nerdy stuff about what we should actually do. And I bet a lot of you in the room can as well. But that is not a big enough group. It's not enough to have the brokers. It's not enough to have the advocates. It's not enough to have the lenders and the builders and so on and so forth. You also have to have the people that are too darn tired at the end of the day to show up. So you have to give them the reason to care about. You have to make it plain. You have to say it out loud. You have to make it explicit. You have to do it over and over again with these decisions. Okay, so let's talk about pre-approved building programs. We call them pattern zones. That's when we put together pre-approved building permits with other elements. And we think this is one of the biggest solutions that's out there. It's a new technology for cities. It's really brand new, and this is something that can really address the permitting side and the quality side of new housing that we get. Remember, our goal, as I'm telling you today, is to make good housing, meaning the kind of housing we can almost all agree that we want, that we can identify in our community when we see it, to make that housing easy to produce. So we did this in Claremore. This was part of a comprehensive effort where we did a whole new code, we did a market study, so on and so forth, and in addition to that, we did a pre-approved building program. They adopted this. You know, Claremore is not really directly relatable to Springfield. I mean, we have the same biology, we have the same psychology, our neighborhoods work the same way, and some of the laws are the same, but they're still different in a lot of ways. There's only 17,000 people that live in Claremore. It's a commuter community with Tulsa. Hey, they've got Route 66, so that's another thing that you have in common. And they've got a little bit of a local economy, legacy commercial around Route 66, and then a local university. They were having issues with their historic neighborhoods, having legacy homes being torn down and having catalog homes by suburban developers being put up in their place, right? So in addition to the sticker shock associated with new construction, which comes with all new construction, and with the emotional shock of seeing these cherished buildings being replaced with totally unremarkable buildings, that motivated them to bring us in and consider pre-approved building programs. And now they're issuing infill permits in less than 5 days. They receive the application and they issue the permit within less than 5 days, often within less than 48 hours. And the reason they're able to do that is because when the applications come in, the applications are complete. The applications are not inquiries about concepts with questions like, what could we do? What will the rules allow us to do? Can you help us? They come in complete. And if you're a builder, or if you are a homeowner who would like to do one project that would make sense for you, and you're kind of wanted to be the ham radio operator of urban development, and you're just going to do the one thing, great. But I bet you finding a land use lawyer that has a good reputation with the council is going to stand in your way. I bet you identifying the great architect and the great engineer in town is going to stand in your way. It's at least going to take you time to figure out, right? You don't have to worry about that in Claremore anymore. The buildings are pre-approved. The site plans are almost all the way finished already, and you're assured a permit if you have a typical parcel and you use one of these plans and you're in the program area. Now, if you've got a creek running through your parcel or something else that's weird, hey, tough luck. Doesn't work for you. You got unique conditions. But for most of the parcels, this works great. And the biggest success for us in Claremore is that 2 different subdivision developers have come forward to the planning director independently, and they've said, hey, listen, you were after us to do downtown development forever. We always kind of flirted with it. We didn't want to learn a new system, never going to do it. But listen, you figured it out. We're doing it now. We're making it part of our portfolio going forward. So that's the biggest success. Springfield could do something like this. Whether they work with us or whether they DIY it, doing pre-approved building permits is a good idea that can work. And by the way, only 2% of residential buildings in the whole country ever involve an architect. Have you noticed? Like, you can look across the landscape and you can tell. So this is a way not just to pre-approve building permits, but it's also a way to enable people to afford to access high-quality architecture because Claremore sponsors the plans. They bought the licenses. Those are paid for already. So in addition to getting a permit 4 to 6 months faster than you would from day one of making your decision to work in Claremore, you also get access to high-quality architecture that's triple vetted. It's vetted by an architect, it's vetted by the builders, and it's vetted by City Hall already. It's a huge deal. Okay, these kinds of programs aren't replacement programs. This is the strongest thing about them, this along with the fact that they're voluntary. So what do I mean by they're not replacement programs? Just because something is pre-approved doesn't mean you have to use it. You want to file a conventional permit application? Go right ahead. No one is stopping you from working under existing laws as much as they will allow you to with the full flexibility that's in them today. But if you want to get done faster and you want to have the plans paid for, here's an option, right? So there's a ton of value in that to offer to builders and to consumers, to end users, in terms of relative affordability on these projects. Also, huge benefits for a city planning or a plan review department, right? How long does it take to clerk a permit? How long does it take to re-clerk a pre-approved permit that you've seen before? Huge difference. Here's the other thing. Because they're voluntary, it means that the city is able to do things that they can't do more generally. There's so much value in an expedited permit with prepaid plans that the city has some flexibility to ask for more. Let's talk about an example. This building on the bottom we call a flex house. We call it a flex house because it can be converted. It's designed from the beginning with the intention of being converted in its life cycle from a single family house to a duplex or back again. Because the program is voluntary, that means the city can impose extra requirements as part of the deal, as part of the contract, part of the bargain. This building is required to be constructed, at construction, to be framed, plumbed, and wired for that conversion. It doesn't mean there's a second kitchen on day one. It means there's plumbing for a second kitchen on day one. It's as simple as replacing a pantry with a side entry and putting in the other fixtures. You own one of these homes and your kids move out. That upstairs unit is worth an extra vacation a year for you. Imagine the neighborhood changes, right? And this house gets sold, right? Whether it's consumer preferences that are changing or the local economy that gets changed, this building is resilient, right? It makes it for a resilient neighborhood. Similarly, you see at the top, you see three structures. Those are arranged in a courtyard. We might call that like a bungalow court or a cottage court or something like that, a pocket neighborhood. It's a great model. Those three buildings are actually all the same building. The prototype building is in the rear. It's a small, modest cottage of about 800 square feet. The two buildings in the front are just stacked floor plans of the same building with a fancy porch attached. When you look at that, the lesson that you should learn is that when you can pre-approve buildings, you can pre-approve bundles of buildings. You can pre-approve buildings based on a theme. And great placemaking, great places, are all variations around a theme. Okay, here's what I mean. You could look at this and you could say, yeah, this sounds great. I can tell you're really excited once again, but it sounds great, but we don't want everything to look the same. Well, there's two kinds of things being the same. Okay, there's things that have variability that are based on the same thing, and then there's stuff that is way too similar, that is actually duplication. Nobody goes to main streets and says, looks just like the last main street I saw, I hate it. Right? Every main street in America looks the same. And they're all charming. They're all the most charming places in our communities. Nobody goes to Paris and comes back and says, hated it, all the buildings look the same. Never going back. Right? There's this element of variability around a theme that actually turns sameness into something that is quite charming, that is lovable, right? And you can do that with pre-approved building programs. You can also do other things because the program is voluntary. This was in Bryan, Texas. These were cottage court plans. They didn't have the political consensus to let cottage courts go wild, right? There's always this concern when there's a new planning proposal, no matter how rooted it is in good science or best practices, no matter what has been done to justify it, legitimize it, there's always a rational concern that someone will abuse the program. In Bryan, they said, everyone loves these buildings, we'll allow cottage courts with these buildings because people can't abuse the program because the architecture is guaranteed to be high quality. So they ran that experiment. When we do programs, we put everything online. How great would it be if you didn't have to go down to City Hall to look at a laminated 3-ring binder or get a certification to read the zoning paragraphs to actually understand them? Right? We're all familiar with Zillow. How many people in here, I bet more than are willing to admit it, have engaged in real estate voyeurism on Zillow today? You said, oh, that house went up for sale, I want to see what kind of furniture and art they've got. Or you say, I wonder what prices are like in that neighborhood, I'm going to check it out, right? Even if you're just browsing for fun, even if it's just for entertainment, that happens all the time. So things shouldn't have to live on a network driver and a 3-ring binder. With these programs, we completely upend what a typical planning proposal, the kind of relationship it has with the community. Instead of trying to interpret and agree on a zoning paragraph, you can look at any parcel in the community, see what is pre-approved. You see what you could get. If you're a builder, you can browse through here and you can do concepts, you can do the next concept and you can compare them and then make your decision. If you're a planner or you're in plan review, when you get an application, it comes complete already. It's already been designed, it's ready to go, it's ready to say, yeah, we can do this, here are a couple more things you need to file. Instead of, your application is deficient, go hire an architect and an engineer. If you are a neighbor and you're only concerned about what could happen, what you see is what you could get. Choose any parcel on your street, at the end of the block, on the next street over, and you don't have to worry that somebody is going to abuse the legal language of a new zoning paragraph, because it's been pre-approved. Okay, so let's end on this. This is the punchline. I said earlier when I was presenting at City Hall that I don't really do baseball metaphors in general. I'm making an exception today. Look, when you do this kind of work, and if you're playing baseball itself, right, you win the game with every single run. Every run counts, right? Your strategy, your winning strategy is to get as many runs as possible, and it doesn't matter if it's a single or it's a double or it's a home run, right? Every run counts. But nothing packs the stadiums more than home runs and grand slams. Load those bases up, hit a couple of grand slams, you are going to be selling tickets like nobody's business. You got the most popular team in the league like you've never expected before. And you can do the same thing for housing. You can do the same thing, believe it or not. I told you I was going to get too excited for housing permits. You can hit a grand slam for housing permits. And here's what it looks like. First, you got to calibrate the codes. That's a given. If you get the laws right, if you change what's allowed, you'll get the inquiries. Step 1, even if you don't get the applications, even if you don't convert inquiries into applications, calibrating the codes will get you the inquiries. You're on base. You got one base loaded, right? If you can pre-approve buildings, you've made it easy. Now you can start converting those bases, those on bases, into runs. You can start getting good applications for small-scale projects that fit into the community, small-scale projects that aren't happening now because they're functionally illegal. Next, I'm not going to talk a lot about this today, but the financing is tough. It is super tough. Okay, there is no standard product. I use the word product intentionally, like literally, Wall Street invented loan products for strip malls, for storage facilities, for pharmacies, for fast food joints, for apartment complexes, for single-family house subdivisions, for one-off single-family houses. You know what they didn't invent products for? All the old stuff that we have on Main Street in the neighborhoods that are next to it. So this is really tough, but if you got lenders in the audience today, if you can recruit lenders into this discussion, this can be fixed. The best way to fix it, love to talk more about it off to the side, is by doing something like a local mortgage insurance fund tailored to these kinds of developments. In location, with location-based criteria combined with mentorship criteria. If you can get somebody to go through a real estate development program or in the small-scale real estate development skills, and they can graduate from that program, then you can qualify them based on their location and their education in a program like that, and you can justify giving them a loan. You do that at scale in a community across a couple of targeted neighborhoods, and you can keep the default rates low. Just like mortgage insurance did for us for all of the single-family subdivisions that we started building in the 30s. So that's the last point, mentorship. nothing happens. You cannot hit a grand slam without mentorship. You might get a couple of runs, but you can't pack the stadium without mentorship. And this is what ULI is for. This is the core of what ULI does. The absolute fundamentals of your work. And if you're in this room, okay, there is somebody else in this room that you can be a mentor to, or that you can seek mentorship from. I promise you. And here's why. If you do small-scale development, or you talk to anybody who does small-scale development, I make this joke. I'm going to make this joke again. If any of you do yoga, you may have heard of this, the small-scale development pose. No? Okay, it looks like this.
Show me.
Oh. And it goes on and on and on. Suppose you have to hold. Here's the thing, like, you have to have a mindset where small failures don't end you. You have to have a mindset where small successes can be celebrated. And you can't do that alone. It doesn't mean you have to take on a partner. It doesn't mean you have to get married to a partner, right? And a business deal. That might be right for you, or it might not. But it does mean you need a mentor. Maybe more than one. Definitely more than one. And that happens in this group. All the advocacy, all of the recruiting and making this a big tent, all of that is just for entertainment value if you don't add the mentorship. But if you do that, if you do that, you've really got something that you can build on, and you'll see it. You'll hit the grand slam. That's it for me. I really appreciate being here. I'd love to help out in any way. Professional courtesy, please reach out to me no matter what it is. I'm not saying I'll be timely in getting back to everybody, but I will make an effort. And again, really no matter what it is. I'll just tell you if I can't help because I'm not the right expert. And if you want to do some kind of small-scale development training, I work with a national nonprofit that does this, and we help people who don't do small-scale development yet, but know that they ought to. And we'll teach them how to do a property transaction, how to run a pro forma, how to build a team, how to make a team assessment, how to find a contractor, how to read a zoning code, how to talk to the planning clerks and not ruin their relationships, right? We'll teach them all of that stuff because that's what we need for our communities. Our communities need our locals to be able to do this work. So that's systems and that's mentorship. And I think y'all can do it. Y'all got what it takes. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
What if you have the two and combine them and made a duplex?
Yeah, great question. So in Claremore, that happened.
Oh, wait, what was the question?
Oh yeah, I'll repeat the question. Good. I forgot. I facilitate all the time, and I was violating my own rule. So the question was, what if you have two buildings? Can you put them together? So the short answer is yes, with conditions. It would be best to choose a pre-approved building that already had the two units that you wanted together. Yes, you could. So you can combine units, but here's what you got to consider. Building permits exist for a reason, right? Because there are life safety implications with how. Yeah, exactly. So if you're going to make a major modification like that, it could be straightforward, or it could kick you out of expedited review and put you back into getting a building permit with something that has to be reviewed in detail. So it comes down a little bit to a case-by-case basis, but the short answer is yes, that's possible.
Well, they would have to line out and deal with it. Well,
Yeah,
duplexes can offset as well, but
totally.
if they're close enough, you can tie them together, you still got two houses.
Yeah, so
So you haven't lost any.
Yeah, exactly. And that has happened in Claremore. That was actually the first project that came out of the program in Claremore. Is something we never expected. Is they took one building they like and another building they like, and they put them together, and then they built two of those. And we think that they could have done a better job according to our aesthetic preferences and so on and so forth. But hey, it looks fine. It looks great, and it should be allowed. Yeah, okay, so second question first. Yes, we can do this with conventional codes, or we can do it with form-based codes. It works best with form-based codes because we already have a lot of direction to go on. It gives us a huge head start. So it's a more natural fit with form-based codes. but it works with both ways. And then the first question was, how do you go about choosing the buildings? So there's a couple of ways to do that. You know, we've worked with communities where they've said, we don't need to do any public engagement, we've done enough, just pick the buildings. And you know, you might think that's kind of a dream, but to us, that kind of sets us up for hard questions later and having to do rework. So we really like to have a more facilitated process along the way. We like to meet with builders a minimum of 3 times, where we talk about the program and we vet buildings with them, and we like to meet with general public, the neighborhoods where these are going to be implemented along the way, similar amount of times. What we really like to do is talk about the program once, then come back with a short list of buildings and pass around 3D models of the buildings, show people models on top of a neighborhood plan so that they can imagine where the buildings would be placed. They can hold them up with their eye, they can like look in the living room or imagine sitting on the porch. We really like to do that, and what you have to remember though, I'm going to add to that, what you have to remember is that you will get people who say, I love these buildings, you did such a good job, I want to see these in my neighborhood. But that is a different result than asking them, is this something you would build for yourself? So you have to make sure you address both dimensions whenever you do that, and that's what we really try to pay attention to. So what else? We can do one more. Yes?
What's a typical square foot size of the product that you're showing?
Okay, so in general, because we're mostly focused on infill programs, we're looking at homes that are more modest. So when we talk about cottages, typically that's an average of around 800 to 850 square feet up to 1,200. When we talk about houses, we're talking about 1,200 to 2,000 square feet, with the average being in the middle. We don't talk very much about larger single-family houses, although there are a couple of, in Overland Park, Kansas, we're talking with them about including larger homes for some of their subdivisions, to do better subdivisions. But we're mostly doing infill programs with smaller units. Yeah.
So with these communities that you have generated more people in smaller zones and smaller areas, have you had success working with the cities to increase the infrastructure to accommodate the larger traffic and utility usage?
Yeah, so the best thing, first off, cities who refuse to improve the infrastructure capacity are deal breaker cities. We can't do this kind of work there, so it's one of the things that is a prerequisite for us for doing the work. It's not that they have to have already done the infrastructure capacity, but there has to be a recognition that that is their responsibility, and they have to be prepared to talk about how they're going to commit to it and at what level and in what locations. So that being said, we just kicked off a project in Detroit with the Detroit Land Bank. We're looking at 5 different neighborhoods. Those are a mix of neighborhoods. Look, Detroit has a reputation, but if you have been to Detroit in the last 5 years, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, downtown and downtown adjacent neighborhoods are totally different than the reputation. It's a vibrant, booming, amazing city. And the neighborhoods that we're looking at run the mix of everything that you would expect that you saw in news articles 12, 15 years ago, and neighborhoods that are being revitalized and boomed. And one of the selection criteria to your question is, does the city already have infrastructure investments on the budget? And that's probably how we're going to choose the neighborhoods that we launch in.
What? Okay. What you were talking about earlier, as far as the pre-planned route, so it's easy to go down and get your permit. What sizes are the lots? Basically 75, 150?
So we can be very flexible on the lot sizes.
So you could have a small house on a big lot.
You could have a small house on a big lot.
You get a big house on a small lot without breaking separation.
Yeah, so
Setbacks.
we are almost always directed by communities to make recommendations that will increase the number of homes that are available for purchase over time. That's usually one of the primary things that we are told that we have to do. So our top recommendation is make it easy to make small lots. And we're not saying lots have to be small, but we're saying every time you can subdivide a property, you double the home ownership opportunities.
And the tax base.
And the tax base. So we are totally comfortable with lots that are as narrow as 20 feet. That's the extreme, right? 50 is normal. 50 is what we would consider shooting for par, right? If you don't allow lots that are, if your smallest lots are wider than 50, you've got work to do. You really have work to do. And those rules, and we can show you the math, those rules amount to a policy to make sure stuff is unaffordable or in decline. So we really recommend small lots as much as possible. And we tailor the program, we select the buildings according to what lot sizes we're able to get. Last question here.
How do you get the city to fall in line with this?
The question is, how do you get the city to fall in line? Okay, raise your hand if you fantasize about running for office. I said fantasize, I didn't say commit, right? Be honest, like who hasn't dreamt of what you could do if you were elected, right? So I'm not being facetious, you know, let me give you a real answer. I love to challenge people to run for office. I ran for office. Talk to me afterwards about why you should or why you definitely shouldn't. I'll give you both sides. But here's the thing, like what you're doing now is the thing that you do. Okay, so I was asked a question earlier about how to engage with council members. Okay, here's what you have to do. You have to show up to meetings because that's where the decisions are made. You know that. The city council hearings, the planning commission hearings, those are the boardrooms where decisions get made. So you have to show up. It can't just be one of you. It has to be a group of you. And here's what you say. You say, I'm here representing a coalition that includes bankers, realtors, advocates, affordability professionals, contractors, plumbers, framers. The list goes on and on. As long as you can make that list, you make it that long. You say, I'm here to represent those people, and respectfully, I think that we need to consider this in these ways. I think what's important to this community is that we have more housing, and that it's good housing, and that's what we need to focus on in our discussion. And if we're not talking about that, you say, I think that we've gotten off track, and we need to get back on track. And these are the people I represent. And that doesn't work one time. It just doesn't work one time. It has to happen over and over again, and you have to run your own people for office. So that's how it happens. When I said the word never, ever, 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 whatever, ever ends, that's what I meant. So, you know, there's a decorum at city council hearings that is usually pretty, unintended. You know, usually city council decorum falls into one of two things, and sometimes it switches from item to item, depending on how tired people are or how long the agenda was. And the first decorum is, we're just going to be polite to one another, and we're not going to challenge what anyone else says. And that's not a productive discussion. That is making a friendship more important than the results. The second kind of decorum is one that is argumentative just because, right? Like maybe I didn't like the way you voted on that other issue, or I don't like the church you go to, or I don't like what you said about this group of people, you know, whatever it is, and it is argument by proxy, okay? So when you see that happening, the only way that doesn't happen is if there's a strong personality that runs the meeting. So whether it's the mayor or the city manager, or sometimes a member who's been there for a while, or a new member with gumption, you know, they can correct those things. But if there's not somebody like that, then someone in the community has to do it. And so that's what I mean by making that statement of, we're off track, we're not talking about the right things. This is what's important to us, right? And so that's what you have to do, you have to correct the decorum.
With that, let's give a round.